Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian. Pertamanya saya mengucapkan syukur kehadirat Ilahi atas keizinannya untuk menyertai tuan-tuan dan puan-puan pada pagi yang mulia ini. Pada kesempatan pagi ini saya terlebih dahulu saya ingin mengucapkan setinggi-tinggi permintaan kepada panel pembentang pada hari ini, iaitu Dr. Hazman Shah bin Abdullah, iaitu pakar jaminan kualiti yang juga merupakan pengurusi panel kajian semula standard ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran 2021. Saya juga ingin mengucapkan selamat datang kepada sesi webinar standard ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran, dan ucapan ribuan terima kasih kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang meluangkan masa sebagai pihak berkepentingan untuk mendapatkan maklumat terkini berkaitan standard ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran yang telah dikaji semula. Okay, untuk agenda ringkas pada hari ini, kita akan mulakan sesi pembentangan dalam pukul sebentar lagi oleh Dr. Hazman, dan sesi selepas tu baru kita akan adakan sesi Q&A lah. So lebih kurang kita akan tamat sesi webinar ini pada jam 12 tengah hari. Okay. Next, untuk seterusnya bagi sesi soal jawab, pihak urustia ingin memohon supaya soalan yang dimajukan pada pijin poll yang dipaparkan. So pihak tuan-puan boleh mengimbas QR code ataupun boleh klik link yang kami sediakan pada ruang chat. So maknanya setiap soalan yang ingin diutarakan perlu ditulis di pijin poll, bukan di ruang chat. Kita khawatir nanti sekiranya soalan dinyatakan di ruang chat, kita tidak akan, soalan tersebut tidak akan dibaca. Okey. Sekiranya ada yang ingin bertanya terus untuk mendapatkan clarification, mohon klik pada raise hand dan Usti akan memberi laluan kepada tuan-puan di akhir sesi nanti untuk mengutarakan persoalan. Semua soalan ini akan dibaca selepas tamat sesi pembentangan Dr. Hazman, ya. Okey, seterusnya. Okey, bagi memastikan standard ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran kekal relevan, MQA telah melaksanakan kajian semula dokumen ini bermula pada Julai 2020 dan telah dibentangkan di mesyuarat majlis pada tahun ini bulan Februari. Ya. Pembentangan ini adalah berdasarkan kepada input yang diterima daripada pihak berkepentingan. Kandungan dokumen telah disemak dan ditambah baik selaras dengan perkembangan semasa pada peringkat nasional dan global oleh panel pakar yang terdiri daripada ahli akademik yang dilantik. Okay. Sedia maklum, kami MQA telah mengeluarkan surat keliling berkenaan tentang penguatkuasaan standard master and doctoral degree. So yang mana tarikh berdasarkan itu kita ada 3 tarikh. Tarikh bermula 1 April 2021 hingga 31 Mac 2020, tempoh transisi bagi semua program yang telah mendapat akreditasi sementara dan akreditasi penuh untuk mematuhi standard ini. Ini bermakna ada sehingga Mac 2020, maknanya current program yang telah mendapat akreditasi perlu diselaraskan ataupun diselarikan dengan standard yang telah kami kuatkuasakan inilah sehingga Mac 2020. So bagi item 2 iaitu kuatkuasa bermula 1 April 2021 adalah berkenaan dengan entry requirement ataupun student selection. So mana pengambilan pelajar bagi semua program yang telah mendapat akreditasi sementara dan akreditasi penuh perlu mematuhi kelayakan masuk berdasarkan standard program. Okey, yang ini saya nak terangkan lebih lanjut. Okey. So kalau tuan-tuan perempuan tengok dalam standard yang terkini, ia ada menyatakan tentang kelayakan masuk bagi program master dan PhD perlu kepada bachelor and master in related fields, ya. Perlu kepada maknanya qualification yang berkailah related dengan program master dan PhD akan diambil. So those with unrelated qualification may be admitted if candidate has relevant experience or undergo prerequisite. So maknanya kelayakan yang tidak related ataupun tidak punya pengalaman yang bersesuaian perlu mengambil prerequisite ataupun bridging course. So kali ini kalau tuan-puan perasan ataupun tahu, kita dah ada 2 standard program yang menyatakan struktur bridging bagi program master dan PhD daripada kandidat yang tidak memiliki kelayakan degree yang bersesuaian, iaitu standard program bahasa dan satu lagi standard program Muamalat and Islamic Finance. Dua standard ni yang dah menyatakan struktur ataupun foundation untuk pelajar ambil bagi pelajar-pelajar yang tidak mempunyai kelayakan yang berkaitan. Okay? Those program standard yang tidak menyatakan structure bridging bagi kelayakan-kelayakan yang bukan related, so terpulang kepada IPT untuk membangunkan bridging program yang bersesuaian mengikut program tersebut. So maknanya terpulang kepada PPT lah, berdasar sekiranya kita kuat-kuasakan, sekiranya 1 April kita telah kuat-kuasakan, IPT perlu create bridging ataupun prerequisite untuk program-program tersebut lah. Okay, so in terms of bila accreditation masuk, so sekiranya bridging tersebut didapati tidak bersesuaian dan bridging tersebut tidak dinyatakan di dalam program standard, so kami akan tidak meletakkan ia sebagai syarat lah, lebih kepada penambahbaikan, sehingga program standard tersebut kita membuat adjustment untuk memasukkan structure bridging program yang bersesuaian mengikut program. Ya, jelas So maknanya dari segi entry requirement, so maknanya kena fulfill, semua candidate perlu mempunyai qualification yang related. So those yang tak related, so kena ambil bridging program. So maknanya bridging program ni boleh dibangunkan sendiri oleh institusi. So bridging program ni tidak bermakna ia perlu tambahan 1 semester atau sebagainya. Ia juga boleh dilaksanakan secara intensif. Ya, mana secara intensif berdasarkan struktur yang bersesuaian untuk memasuki program tersebut. Okey. Okey, yang ketiga 1 April juga sebuah program baru yang memohon akreditasi tentara perlu mematuhi ketetapan dokumen. Semua ini bagi semua program barulah. So saya difahamkan kami juga menerima permohonan untuk kelayakan masuk ni extend daripada 1 April. So far yang kita telah decide, those yang pelajar yang telah menerima offer letter sebelum 1 April, kita boleh terima. Maknanya boleh terima lah, maknanya tidak perlu melalui bridging program. Okey? Jelas ya? Okey, saya itu saja penjelasan ringkas mengenaan surat keliling bilangan 1/2021 bertarikh 20 Mac berkenaan dengan ijazah standard, ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran. Saya rasa saya tanpa melengahkan masa, saya ingin mempersilakan Prof Hazman untuk sesi perkongsian seterusnya untuk membentangkan standard ijazah sarjana dan kedoktoran. Dipersilakan Prof.
Terima kasih Saudara Zamrin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam Ramadan kepada mereka yang beragama Islam. Let me go to my slides. Okay, go straight to. Okay, before I start, I encourage everyone in the HEP, everyone whose work relates to masters and PhD by whatever mode, to actually look at the full document, which is the standard. The presentation is going to focus on areas of change or amendment, but reading the full document will give you a complete picture of the changes. This is the first time the standard that was introduced in 2013 has been reviewed, following the normal procedure by MQA. Every 5 years or so, the standards will be reviewed, and will be from as Zamrin mentioned, following the timeline given, will become the reference for HEP in developing and also offering master's and doctoral degree. And this should be read together with all other related documents, most importantly, program standards. Most of the program standards are under review, and the changes in this standard certainly will have some impact on the standards, especially in terms of entry requirement and a few other things. And they will be appropriately amended or aligned with this standard in due time. Many of them are in the process. Some of them already taken a note and issued the amendments. Zamrin mentioned 2 of them, but I think all of them are in the pipeline. Some of them, the whole standard is going through changes, so they'll reflect this in the new revision of the program standard. And some program standards have already gone revision. They probably issue a supplementary or an addendum, which addresses areas where, because of the MDD, the master's and doctoral degree standard, they have to make some adjustments within the recently revised program standards. So, so there is a set of documents that will become reference to HEP together with the, I would use the acronym MDD to refer to this particular standard for ease of reference. And as with the earlier standard and as with any other standard, this describes minimum levels of practice, acceptable practice, by all providers of postgraduate programs, whether they are by research, mixed mode, or coursework. And we have quite a lot in MQR that relates to this standard and also the respective program standards. Okay, there were a lot of questions in the past about whether the standard or the program standard should become the key reference, or let me put it the other way. Which one actually overrides the other? Actually, the word override is not suitable here because they don't override, they complement, right? The MDD is not discipline specific. It is based on level 7 and level 8. So it's based on the ARAS level. And they apply to all programs irrespective of discipline. The program standards expand, define further, and in some cases also add requirements for a particular discipline. And programs at various levels, especially level 7 and 8, which relates to this standard, they provide more contextualized guidance in terms of all the 7 areas, area 1 to area 7, particularly area 1, area 2, and also in terms of staffing. These are, and maybe resources. These are more standards that will become more appropriate, but the rest are process standards, which are still applicable at whatever level. So that is how the programs, so that they are complementary. And since this is a postgraduate standard, so all program standards must make sure that at the minimum, they are aligned with and observe the requirements here. They can, with, I suppose, good justification, raise the acceptable practice or level of practice for that particular discipline, and they may have good grounds or justification, but they cannot actually go below. They cannot lower it. For example, entry requirement have a lower entry requirement. So all program standards will, if they are not already in line, they will all become in due time, in a short time, all become aligned with this requirement. And this statement in the standard is to clear any doubt in the minds of people who are managing postgraduate programs, program standards panels, and also assessors. So it's clear if there's a conflict, which one will become the reference. So that has been clearly established and stated in writing in the standard in the opening pages. So that's to clear one of the issues that frequently is faced by APP, HEP, even standards panel. Okay, these are some of the issues, questions raised, which the standard try to address. One of the issue is the standard does not really reflect the SDG agenda. That is sort of a neutral, right? So it's a valid observation. There is a need for all standards, especially standards in higher education, to bring this to the fore. It is always implicit in the standards, right? But it actually to make it more visible, more explicit. So in these standards, you will see the word sustainability is now introduced. And also in area 1, there is a statement that urges all higher education providers, especially in postgraduate studies, to pay attention to this SDG goals in the design, delivery, and also continual improvement of the programs. So that is net time by the standard to address this in terms of the research, in terms of the supervision, in terms of publication, and so on and so forth. So that is one. Second one is the 2013 standard was based on the old MQF. So this standard actually revises the program learning outcomes and also the especially the program learning outcomes to MQF 2.0. There is not a substantial or structural change, but there is a need to revise this so that it becomes more aligned with and more explicitly aligned with the MQF 2.0. Now, there was always this issue that the program's learning outcomes are too prescriptive. It is important to understand in this standard and also in other standards, the program learning outcomes are there as a reference. HEP can use this as a reference and write or craft their own program learning outcomes, so long as it addresses the MQF 5 clusters appropriate to the level of the program, in this case, level 7 and 8. So this is a reference, right, for all HEP, APP, anyone looking at postgraduate studies is a reference. It is not there prescribed for you to take and use it. You may want to do that, but it is not written there in that manner with that intention, that it is prescribed everyone take this and use it. You may do so if you want, but it is very important that you take this and contextualize to your postgraduate studies. The learning outcomes you may emphasize certain learning outcomes more than the others, but you address all of them, which is what is required in the MQF under Area 7 and Area 8. But the institutional purpose, vision, mission, interests, agenda can be reflected in the program learning outcomes as well. So it is incumbent upon HEP to take this as a reference and craft your own, which covers MQF, which makes explicit the learning outcomes to all those who are interested in looking at this, students, staff, assessors, other institutions. And at the same time allows you to monitor and measure the attainment of this by students and by cohorts. As long as that is done, that's the purpose. Okay, so this is if you're looking at your own PC, then it shouldn't be a problem. If you're looking at a slide, then it will be a problem. I wouldn't want to go one by one, right? But the learning outcomes are distinguished in terms of whether it's a research base, whether it's mixed mode or coursework base. Mixed mode and coursework has similar orientation, except the scope of taught course differs. In coursework, there's a lot more taught courses compared to the mixed mode. And in research programs, there's no taught element that is that contributes to the fulfillment of the program learning outcomes. It is entirely based on a thesis or an equivalent documentation. Could be conspectus, which has artifacts and so on and so forth. So we want to go into each one, but these learning outcomes have just been basically revised to MQF 2.0. But in the basic essence, it still covers the same requirements. It covers the knowledge, it covers cognitive skills, it covers the broadly all the functional skills, and it covers lifelong learning and ethics. So in the 8 statements, you'll find you're able to link this to MQF 2.0, or if you like, the 5 clusters and the 11 learning outcomes that MQA generally refers to. You can find that connection between this and now. This doesn't mean everyone need to have 8 statements. So there is no prescription in terms of the number of statements. You could have fewer, you could have more. The critical point is it should work for you. Okay, it should work for you in terms of referencing to MQF 2.0. It should work for you because it makes it easy for you to measure attainment. It should work for you because it's easy to communicate to everyone, students, staff, anyone who's looking at this. And also it should work for you in the sense that it also reflects the institutional purposes, which should be unique from one institution to another. So as long as you have that, your program learning outcomes should be in an acceptable form, right? So the 8 there is not prescription, right? And the individual writing is indicative of the level of complexity, the level of the scope of learning, the different skills. So you are free actually to craft it and write it in your own way, except when you are writing this, keep in mind MQF level 7 and level 8, which has got the intended learning outcomes written for all programs. This is not specific to any particular discipline, all programs. So keep that in mind. So whatever verbs that you're using need to be aligned with that level of depth of knowledge or complexity of cognitive skills, communication skills, research ability, and so on and so forth. Keep that in mind. Okay. Okay, the next issue, as you can see, I'm also relating to the changes to issues. So the changes didn't just pop out of the panel. Panel was actually looking at all the collection of issues and problems that are already accumulated by MQA through the last so many years of implementation of this standard. There's no thesis word limit in MDD. Some program standard provided, some did not. And the reason for the difference in program standard is because the MDD 213 did not really indicate this. So there was a diversity of practice at program standards, which then created this issue within the universities. Some of them need to have to meet the program standards in one area, and then the others didn't have. So now the university has to decide one way or another. So in order to resolve this, and it is also a good practice, if you survey around the world, all over, particularly if ours seems to be quite close to the Commonwealth and UK practice, the provision of a range or maximum or minimum word limit is a common practice, and we also think it is a good practice because it provides guidance to students, supervisors, postgraduate providers, and postgraduate deans, managers. So it provides some guidance. So in the standard, in this new revisional standard, it is required that HEP establish minimum word limit, subject to the guidance of provided in relevant program standards. So moving forward, all the revisions of program standard, they will start to indicate what is the minimum word or limit, or in some cases they're using the range. So there will be guidance in terms of word limit, and HEP need to establish this guided by program standards. In the absence of a program standard, then the HEP can establish this on its own based on good practices or practices of other institutions or similar institutions. So where there is no program standard, then that can be the basis. But it is now required that HEP establish this minimum word limit. I think for most, this is not a problem because they already have something of this nature in their rule book, right? Because sometimes it's because of the program standard, but in most cases it is because institutions have already practiced this. So in some ways, a common practice has become a minimum acceptable level of practice in the standard. And this, so there may be some issues surrounding the limit itself. What should be the limit? That's why in the standard, we do not set the limit. We impose a requirement for HEP to set the limit, guided by program standards. And program standards are a better place to look at what should be a reasonable minimum word limit for that particular discipline, because this word limit does differ significantly between disciplines. STEM disciplines, art and design, humanities, and social sciences have got different word limit. So program standards are the right place, better place to provide guidance to HEP in terms of what should be the minimum. Okay, and in the standard 2, where a minimum word limit is not observed by a particular thesis or a master's or PhD documentation, the Senate can decide if that particular documentation, a thesis or prospectus or whatever artifacts that goes along with it, as long as it meets the requirement for a master's or doctoral degree, then the Senate can exempt the student from, or the candidate from, the minimum requirement, right? So if there is an issue within the institution on meeting or not meeting any requirement, then Senate would be the place to resolve this, so long as it meets all other quality requirements associated with that type of research or courses, or combination of research and courses, as long as it meets the requirement. So it's back to the Senate. So we don't want a case where it's on the margin, does not meet the minimum requirement, but it actually meets all other requirements in terms of a master's or PhD doctoral degree thesis, and yet it cannot pass through because it doesn't have the minimum requirement. So the minimum requirement is not to be seen very bureaucratically as a hard rule, but it is a rule that helps to guide, but it's a rule that shouldn't prevent a thesis or documentation that meets all of the requirements from passing, or for the candidate being considered having passed the assessment. Okay, so that's the flexibility, and I'm sure the HEPs will appreciate this. The 213 MDD talked about, provided some guidance on prior publication, but there wasn't anything on concurrent and prospective publications. Now, we see in the institutions, there are pathways where students, after registering for a PhD program, actually working on a series of different publications based on a research program that has been already established for them. This is after registering. That's why we call it concurrent or prospective. Moving forward, this is after registering to carry out research, and eventually they submit their thesis, which includes the publications, the series of publications, which is integrated into the thesis, and they go through the same process of assessment, submission, viva, defense, viva and decision. So they go through this, but there is a slightly different form. So in this standard, that is also addressed, because it's quite popular in the STEM disciplines in many of our local universities and also elsewhere. So the standard has actually included that, so that it can provide guidance and make sure this new variation, which is by publication, is carried out in a way that is healthy and does not in any way affect the outcome that is related to level 7 and level 8. Okay, so we provide guidance for those who are offering this pathway. We know many of the local universities are already having this option for students. So you could come and do a series of research publication and then combine them in a writing. There is still a thesis that integrates all this publication into a coherent whole, and then and it is being examined through the same process. It is there together with your standard thesis-based pathway to a doctoral degree. There was a complaint that the 213 MDD did not talk about or address industrial PhD. Okay. Now, the panel looked at this question long and hard, looked around both in the country and also around the region, especially UK and things like that. So there is a section that actually addresses this. The standard does not treat this as a separate category of PhD because industrial doctorates still, by and large, are doctoral degrees by research. By and large, they are doctoral degrees by research, except that it is a specific type of program. Okay, it still is a research degree, and except that this the type of research that is being carried out is co-determined together with an employer or an industry, and it is often applied in nature, and that's one category of industrial doctorate degrees. Many of these are called PhD because they are purely research-based. And there is another category of industrial doctorates, which is actually also called practice doctorates or professional doctorates. And they do not often lead to a PhD. This is called Doctor of Business, or Doctor of Education, Doctor of Engineering. And there is a variety in terms of how they are done. Some of them are mostly or entirely research-based. Some of them are coursework and research-based. So there's a variety of this. So in the standard, there is a section that talks about this, but they are still research-based, mixed mode or coursework-based type of industrial, professional, or practice-based degrees. And the industry doctors can be adequately addressed by the three different modes that we have right now. So they are not a completely different mode. They fall within this, except the orientation and purpose and the limitation in terms of research is different, right? You have to do a research that the employer endorses or the industry endorses. It's applied in nature. In most cases, they are applied in nature. So it's a solution-oriented, often results in some development of a solution or prototype of some sort. So that's addressed now in the standard, which was not addressed in the 213 MDD. There was also this issue raised about the 213 MDD did not make publication requirement for master's and doctoral degrees. The current or the new MDD has considered this, the panel considered this, and have left this to the institution. Okay, the doctoral and master's outcomes, especially in terms of the research outcomes, they should be publishable, but the publication requirement should be institutions' decision. So HEPs can set their own requirements in terms of publication, how many they want, what type of journal, and so on and so forth. But the standard, the panel decided the standard is not the place to actually do this, because it can, institutions need to determine this. That is one. And related to this is also in the 213 MDD, it already provided for PhD by prior publication, by which we mean candidates who have published extensively scholarly and academic works. They bring this to an institution and offer it to the institution for them to evaluate and consider whether this is evidence of critical in-depth knowledge in a field. This is evidence of knowledge and ability to synthesize and produce new knowledge. This is evidence of research capability, independent individual research capabilities. It's evidence of communication and so on and so forth. So it's for the university to evaluate. So in this standard, the same requirements have been included. Didn't do any changes to this, except we made it very clear that materials and publications that have been used once in an award or that comes out of an award shall not be reused for another award. Okay, so if you've already used this to gain an award, then you cannot use this again to purposes of another award. So the reuse policy has been inserted to make sure there's no abuse. People are not going around taking the same thing and then offering to different places for an award. So that has been inserted. So that's an addition, and we believe that it also makes it clearer, provides clearer guidance to institutions and also candidates who have this kind of publication during their professional career or lifetime, and then they want to seek an award, a doctoral award from an institution. On learning, okay, on student learning, it's the MDD to 2020, oh sorry, 2020, yeah, 2021, 2020. The new MDD clarifies on examiners. Now, examiners are an important component of the master's and doctoral program, particularly by mixed mode and also by research. The previous standard did not explicitly state what are some of the requirements, but there was a common practice around it, and there's also a common expectation around it that examiners need to be in the field. Examiners need to be actively not only in the field but also active in the field, in the sense that they're researching, they're publishing. Examiners also need to be supervising students, so they understand very closely what are the requirements for this level 7 and level 8. And the previous standard did not even talk about people, examiners coming from industry. So now in the standard, we actually made it quite clear what was a common practice, what was an expectation now has become quite explicit. Examiners, number one was already there, so I wouldn't dwell on it. Number two, they need to be from the same field or related field, related to the research of the candidate, right? That's an important statement to make, and that ensures that examiner will be able to perform or carry out a robust evaluation of the student's work. And the student deserves an examiner who is in the field, and also who has, so number three, supervise the candidates. So it's quite clear in terms of what the end product should be. And examiners must be engaged in research and have produced credible publication in or equivalent works. So it could be not just publication, it could be artwork exhibitions, especially in arts, humanities. So they must be actively engaged in research and publication, right? And the last one, you can actually get examiners from the industry, but if you bring someone from industry, then the requirement that they supervise and the requirement that they publish need to be exempted. Because if we insist on this, then most from the industry won't qualify unless they are from private research institutes where they do research and publication, but still they may not be supervising students. So this opens up the scope for examiners. So examiners can actually come from the industry, but since there are always more than one examiner, so we foresee there will be a combination of examiners. Maybe one is from the industry and then the others are from the academia. So together, it will, you can carry out actually an effective evaluation of students' work, especially when the nature of students' work is very much industry oriented. So the number 5 actually opens up that that route. For examiners for doctoral degree, in the previous standard, it required 3 examiners, 2 of whom must be external. But for some time now, the IPTA, or University Awam, have operated under an exemption given by JPT to them to have only 2. So in this standard, you have actually sort of leveled the playing field for everyone, so that it is 2 examiners, and one of whom must be external examiner, external to the institution. But we have also put in an alert there in theses which are multidisciplinary. That means maybe more than 2, more than 1, but could be more than 2 disciplines. Then more than 2 examiners may be necessary. So HEP will have to decide. In some cases, 3 may be still required, but this is based on a particular thesis. But again, university, this is a minimum acceptable practice. So universities that have got 3 examiners for now, you actually may continue with the practice, right? At the minimum, it's in this standard is 2, but you may continue with your practice because it means you want a more intensive or more extensive assessment of your thesis than the minimum prescribed in the standard. So it doesn't stop you from doing that. So that is, and also one of the complaints with the old standard was it tend to address thesis, talks about thesis as a documentation of the research work or the research project the student undertakes for especially in mixed mode and coursework. So in this document, we actually made sure that we also address all other forms, all other disciplines where they may have some form of a thesis, but the thesis goes together with many other artifacts, right? It could be an artwork, could be an exhibition, it could be a performance. So many in art and design and humanities have this. So you'll find the word conspectus. Some in art and design might use the word exegesis, but so conspectus is actually a shorter thesis that incorporates all the artifact that one candidate produces to demonstrate his mastery or in-depth knowledge in a particular field or practice, right? Appropriate to the discipline. So there has, it is important to understand here that there is there is always a written documentation. So it's a question of whether it is just the thesis or it is thesis plus several things. So the thesis is the one that that contains the reflection, the thinking about the artifacts and many things that you have done. So the written documentation must always be there. But because there are components of the thing, in the context of conspectus, there are other artifacts that go along. So naturally, the document itself is a much shorter one. So in the program standard, we expect that there will be guidance provided in terms of what the conspectus, the word limit for the conspectus would be for mixed mode, for master's and PhD, a doctoral degree by mixed mode, and as well as by research. That guidance, I think in some of the program standards already been provided. Art and design has already included this, and similarly, all other program standards that has these requirements will in due time have guidance in terms of conspectus. But in others, it may be just the thesis or dissertation. Okay, so in that sense, the MDD, the new MDD is more inclusive of the reference to all disciplines. Okay, that's in terms of, if I may just go back for a moment on student assessment and learning. In the previous standard, for masters, the viva was optional. Right? Although in practice, we know in most institutions, there was a viva carried out. In this standard, viva is a requirement for both masters and also PhD by mixed mode, and also by research. It's a requirement. So the option has been taken out, but I think based on observation of practice, most of them are already having this. So this doesn't seem like a new imposition or a change. And so that is important to note. I've not noted that, so just want to make it clear. In terms of candidate selection, this is the one that has attracted most attention up to this point, after the standard was finalized and approved by the Majlis. The standard, in this standard, there were, in terms of entry requirement, right, in terms of CGPA, it's like the 0.1 for research, 2.75 is still the same as the old, it was not changed. The second point, if it is between less than 2.75, 2.50, you can admit based on rigorous assessment. Is the same as before. The third point is also the same as before. Now, what has changed here in this standard is the bachelor's degree in the field or related fields. In the earlier standard, it was just bachelor's degree. Even though the word bachelor's degree was used, it was not the intention of the MDD 213 to suggest that just a degree will do for master's and PhD. It is actually implicit that degree in related fields, but it didn't include the word related fields there, and that led to some confusion, right? So as a standard, is just say, okay, to bachelor's to master's, you have a bachelor's degree for master's, even though it's not made explicit, it has to be has to be understood as in related field, at least in the field or related fields. But certainly the word in the field or related field was not there. So that has been added in this standard. It's actually making explicit something that was already in an understanding and expectation, something that was implicit, but making it explicit in this standard. And also the point number 4 is to make sure, also to enable and to ensure candidates who do not have a bachelor's or qualification in the field or related field, there is still access to the that program if they so desire. If they want to complete a program, even though they don't have the qualification, they can still be admitted. And the way this can be done is 2 ways. One is for the HEP to look at the experience. Now, qualification indicates knowledge acquired through a formal structured program. But knowledge and learning can also be acquired through experience. It may not be very structured. It may not be structured in the sense that it's organized, it's systematic, it's over a compact duration. But nevertheless, that is still knowledge and learning. And HEP can actually look at the experience, and if the person has sufficient experience in the field, for example, someone doesn't have an IT related qualification, but has sufficient experience in the IT field, then that student can be admitted. So it is for the HEP to actually assess this experience systematically, seriously, and document that experience. And the documented experience tells HEP that this student has sufficient background in IT to enroll on a level 7 or level 8 program and to continue in the program, right? That is the objective of the looking at the experience. So we did not use a number of years in this particular case because years may actually misdirect. So you look directly at the experience. It may be 3 years, it may be 10 years, it may be 2 years, but looking directly at experience and to ensure that the nature of the experience, the variety of the experience actually covers almost like this tells us that he or she has got adequate understanding of or knowledge of IT to be able to pursue a level 7 or level 8. So that's for the HEP to do. So point number 4 allows people, candidates with unrelated qualifications still to be admitted or have access to the program. Now, if they do not have this, then some form of prerequisite courses need to be provided to ensure and also to enable they have sufficient foundation knowledge or foundational knowledge to be able to be admitted into a level 7 or level 8 program, right? Now, there was a lot of question about this prerequisite, right? Now, level 7 and level 8 in MQF is in a hierarchy, right? Level 1 to level 7 and level 8. So level 7 outcomes and the credit and the duration is also based on the assumption that students who come into the program come with a level 6 knowledge of that particular area, discipline, or practice. So you're not entering a master's program, a PhD program with zero knowledge in the field or discipline, right? So the prerequisite, the looking at the experience, is to ensure that you have adequate foundational knowledge to pursue a level 7 or level 8. Remember, level 7 and level 8 is not going to deal with the basics which you get in level 4 and level 6, right? It's going to start at some level and move on. So this is to ensure that that happens. So that is why there's prerequisite. If a candidate doesn't have experience or the experience is not relevant, and the qualification is actually not related qualification, they can still access the program. There is still access provided. The students still can be admitted, but provided there is a prerequisite that is organized for the students. Okay, and prerequisites, I think they're already program standards, 2 program standards, Muamalat and Islamic Finance, and also language studies have already solved this puzzle by indicating what the prerequisites shall be. And I think in due time, all program standards will be start looking at this. But if there's no guidance in the program standards, then HEP decide what these prerequisites courses that they need to take. So they can come from an undergraduate course, right? If you are entering level 7, you can actually choose this from undergraduate course. Usually the senior year or the final year courses, which can cover most of the areas or the important areas in that particular field or discipline. For level 8, you're talking about level 7, so you can come from master's program. And HEP is to determine the number of courses or the credits, if you want, that will form this prerequisite course for a student. Now, in some cases, the student, based on experience based on his undergraduate days, might have done some courses. Okay, he may be an engineering graduate wanting to do a business master's, but during his engineering days, he has done some business courses. So that business courses can be taken into account, right? And that may be enough. I mean, you might have taken finance and accounting, you might have taken marketing, you have taken management. So that might be enough to allow him to be admitted. So it may be an unrelated qualification, engineering. But if you look into the courses, some students in some programs do have business options. So they may have taken business options. So you can actually consider this. And then maybe you only need to do one prerequisite course because you have done some. So it is up to the HEP to look at the candidate and the qualification. And when I mean qualification, it's actually the content of the qualification, the courses you have taken. And there may be business courses taken. So which can already account for some of the prerequisites. So you might have to do a little bit of top up, or in some cases, they may not need any top up because they have already done these courses. Or the courses plus the experience they've had together allows you to make the decision that this student can actually proceed into the program without a prerequisite. So because he has got some courses done at the undergraduate level or at the master's level, and he has got experience that together, when you put together these two together, he can actually be admitted. So this is to the HEP, for the HEP to do. And what is important is that in making these assessments and decisions, make it systematic, make it documented, make it transparent. And then if there's any evaluation from MQ or any other body, then you lay out the process, the documentation, the criteria used, and the decision, right? And up to this point, I have already been told by MQA that if an assessment comes and finds that the practice of the bridging is not as expected or as required, that issue will be treated as a continual penambahbaikan. It's as a CQI issue rather than a condition or syarat. So it would not be treated as a syarat because you are given the discretion to do it. If upon evaluation later on by MQA assessors and they find that that prerequisite thing was not done as expected, as required, then there may be suggestion how you should improve this moving forward. But that would not become a condition or syarat that actually stops your accreditation, right? So that should provide comfort to institutions and also encouragement for them to have a system of doing this. and make sure they're systematic, it is serious, and is documented. And prerequisites can be carried out. The standard does not specify how you should carry out. So what time period? It can be intensive, it can be over the weekend, it could be online. So HEP can decide how you want to carry it out in a way that makes it practical and convenient to the candidate and the HEP as well. Okay, but the nature of prerequisite is that you need to do this before you enroll. You actually start the master's program or PhD program, right? So you have to go through this and complete this. And these prerequisite courses, there are assessments, and these are not audit courses, assessments, so that both candidate and HEP know that the student has got acceptable level of understanding of this particular discipline, enough for him to actually now take on the level 7 challenge or the level 8 challenge. So that's the idea behind the prerequisites. So same thing for doctoral degree, the master's also in the same field, and the same what I explained for master's level, the unrelated qualification also applies to doctoral level, right? Same requirement, no change there. These are details. So whether it's a coursework, mixed mode, masters by research, the related degree or the qualification in the field or related field applies across. I won't go into the details each one of this. Okay. In the previous standard, there wasn't this pathway, but because many institutions are already practicing this, again, to even the playing field and open this to all, not just by UA. So excellent students at level 6 or bachelor's, excellent here is defined as first class, and where you're using a CGPA of 3.67 and higher or equivalent, and from any sector, whether it could be academic, could be TVET or skills, they can be admitted into doctoral program as long as they meet the 2 other requirements. They undergo an internal assessment and any other requirements the HEP might want to impose, right? So in most cases, there is an internal assessment to make sure the students are mentally and emotionally ready for transition into the level 8 program from a level 6 program. And so that as long as that is there, so that is open. And conversion to masters was already there in MDT 213, except that it only talked about full-time students. So we have now actually addressed also part-time students, because part-time students do it over longer duration. So the conversion period was adjusted according to the duration for the part-time, right? So that's just to make sure it's also addresses part-time students who may be considered, who may consider or be considered for conversion. This is bachelor students, students, candidates with bachelor qualification in the master's program, and there is sufficient evidence of work that may be appropriate for doctoral program, and as long as they go through they meet the time duration and they go through the 2 other requirements, that there is an assessment of their work and the ability to carry out research at doctoral level, and also approval of the standard. These are even before this standard is standard practice in in HEPs. The previous standard did not make any mention about minimum language proficiency of candidates. Right? In this standard, the HEP is required to set the minimum language proficiency subject to, again, program standards, and if the program standard did not set one, or there is no program standard in this particular case, then based on the needs of the program and also the medium of instruction. Now, language proficiency did not necessarily always relate to English. It could be Bahasa Malaysia, it could be Bahasa Arab, it could be any other Bahasa, which is the medium of instruction for the program, right? If the student is coming into a program where there's a coursework or mixed mode or research-based program, the proficiency is a key requirement, an important requirement to follow and to perform and to complete the program, right? So it is incumbent upon HEP to set this minimum requirement, and this requirement need to follow, need to consider the program standards, and if there's no program standard, the needs of the program, right? If at a master's level, what kind of proficiency is required for the students to follow and also to demonstrate through all the work, the courses, the assignments, the thesis, the presentation. So the language is always a key component through which all this demonstration is to take place. So if the language is not set, that can actually seriously impair the quality of students coming out from the program. And some programs might require higher, some programs might require less of proficiency in language. So that is already moderated by the program standards and can also be moderated by the HEP. If there's no program standard to help you moderate this to that particular discipline. Okay, in terms of academic staff, the MDT 213 didn't really address supervisors, examiners, and also instructors or lecturers from the industry. Now, because collaboration is a major agenda now, not only in carrying out research, but also in all kinds of programs. So at level 7 and level 8, so that was the question. And in this standard, we've provided guidance that co-supervisors for master's and also doctoral degree can come from the industry, right? And because when you look at the industry, the nature of recruitment in the industry is does not require, in many cases, master's and PhD and so on and so forth, as in the higher education sector. So you may not often find people with master's and PhD if the same requirement applies. So, but for masters, as long as the person has a bachelor's and at least 5 years experience at a level appropriate for the dissertation, right? They can be brought in as co-supervisor. The primary supervisor or main supervisor is still from the university. So the co-supervisor can bring in this experience to bear on the process of supervising and guiding the students to the final output. Same thing for doctoral degree as well. So that is to open up this. Some universities are already doing this, but there's always the issue of qualification. Okay, so now this allows you to bring in people with masters to co-supervise from the industry, to co-supervise doctoral candidates, and people with bachelors but with experience in the related fields or in the field or related to the dissertation. to be appointed also as co-supervisors for masters. So that is made possible, made clearer. And also with teaching staff, right? Mixed mode and coursework, they are taught components. Practitioners, experts from industries, for master's level program, they need to have at least a bachelor's, and for doctoral programs, they need to have at least a master's. They can be assigned to each courses, especially courses that practice-oriented, professional in nature, hands-on, and where these individuals have appropriate experience. They can be brought in as teachers, not only as supervisors or co-supervisors, but they can be brought in as teachers as well. Okay, so as particularly for coursework and mixed mode, because there's taught components, so you can bring them in to teach. Where the courses are a combination of theory and practice, then even co-teaching or team teaching is possible, right? If the course is one that is fully practitioner-oriented, industry-oriented, and then the whole module may be conducted by this industry expert. Where it is a combination, there is a theory element and there's also a practice element, then co-teaching and team teaching would be an ideal arrangement, and you can get your partner from the industry as long as they meet these minimum requirements. Okay, still under staff, under the new standard, like English requirement, sorry, not English requirement, language requirement, HEP is actually required to set the ratio of candidates to supervisors, guided by program standards, if the program standard provides some ratios. In the absence of anything in the program standard, or if there's no program standard, then the HEP need to set the ratio by looking at the total responsibilities of their academic staff, because they're not just supervising, they're also teaching, they're also managing, they're also carrying out research, they're also carrying out consultancy. So need to set this in view of the total responsibilities of the lecturer, and also good practices in higher education, in the industry, right? So there are ratios that are practiced by different institutions, and it goes by grade or level, associate professor, and whether they are just purely research-based professors, only looking at research, or they are both research and teaching duties there, and so on and so forth. So there are some common practices which the universities can use as a guide or reference if they're setting it on their own. But the important thing is they need to set the ratio and manage using this ratio, right? Manage the distribution of work or the planning for the staff based on this ratio that we have, which is something that is customized to the institution, and also guided by the relevant program standards. Some of the program standards have this, and now that this standard requires the HEP to set the ratio, so we expect that all the program standards will now set a ratio or range of ratios that is appropriate for that particular type of discipline. The next issue that we address is that comes from observations through during MQA accreditation. Supervisor, put in brief in supervisor quality or supervisory quality. Supervision, like teaching, is a set of skill. There is a set of knowledge that goes along with it. There's a set of skills that go with it, and there's also a set of ethics and values that go along with it. And current practice is it's sort of picked up along the way, where someone acts as a co-supervisor. So it's not by a plan or program or structure. So it is expected that as a co-supervisor, you will learn from, you will observe the supervisor and then pick up these things, and later on as you graduate to become the main supervisor or the principal supervisor, you would have acquired all these things. But that is leaving it to chance. It may or may not happen. So in this, in order to ensure that all supervisors at the base minimum have exposure to the basic knowledge, skills, and attitude they need to have to function, to perform as a co-supervisor and eventually as a principal supervisor. In this standard, supervisors are required to go through a structured supervisor training, which also means HEP must arrange for structured supervisory training for those who are supervisors or those going to be supervisors. Okay, so it is up to the HEP to think in terms of the training. It's a structured training, means it's systematic, and it may have elements of something that is taught, something that is enacted, experience, and something that might actually involve reflection or role play and things like that. So it has to be a structured training program, and this training program should provide them with all the information they need as a supervisor. The research policies, the ethics policies, the IP policy, the publication policies, the plagiarism policies, dissertation requirements, outcomes, so on and so forth. So all things that they need to have as a supervisor. That's all the policy and documentation requirements of the institution. In addition to this is in terms of the program outcome. They are supervising students either in a research mode or mixed mode towards the end product, which is a dissertation or thesis. So this program should also deal with or address the issue of what are the parameters of this outcome. Often this is left to individuals to decide what is new knowledge, what is novel knowledge, what makes a contribution, original contribution, things like that. This is the place to actually expose supervisors, expose new PhDs to this, so that there is a common set of understanding as they guide students, so that there is a common set of understanding, and because all students are going through different supervisors, different co-supervisors, or different teams of supervisors, but eventually the end product, they are judged by the same requirements, right? They need to demonstrate to the research. If it's a research-based program, they need to demonstrate the research work and the depth of knowledge, the ability to carry out independent research, ability to communicate this in the thesis cogently, clearly, for specialist audience and also general audience. So these things are commonly expected. So the training will make sure that all the common understanding is actually provided in a structured setting. So everyone has got this. And of course, along the way, they'll pick up further things on the job. As a co-supervisor, they might learn some skills to motivate, to encourage students, and so on and so forth. So, but this one provides a common platform for everyone to start off, just like teaching. So supervisory skill is not just something that evolves and you pick up along the way. It needs to be structured, because more and more postgraduate programs are starting, more and more students are in there, more and more foreign students are coming there. So one key element of the equation is actually a supervisor. And the supervisor need to be trained so that that doesn't become a big contributory element to problems faced by the individual, and also interpersonal relationships and cross-cultural issues. On research, on resources, we make it clear in this standard that the resources can be shared, right? There was always this question that came up whether the labs has to be dedicated to a program or within the university, whether they can be shared between universities, between programs, and so on and so forth. Yes, they can be shared. It can be even be provided through a consortium. It can be an outsourced service. The key thing is the students or candidates in the doctoral and master's program have access to these resources, or use the word reasonable access, and is adequate to the scale of the program. The number of students you have, the more students you have, more access, more resources needed, maybe more access. So whatever arrangements you make, whether it's in-house provision or through a consortium or outsourced service, the most important thing is the students have adequate access to these resources to complete their program, to complete their studies. So that will be the judge. And in this standard, we have actually expanded on the IT resources, because more and more supervision is conducted on this platform. Students are accessing all the library facilities through this platform. So having a strong, robust IT infrastructure is now becoming key. So in this standard, that has been put down there as something that the providers need to cater in the postgraduate program, level 7 and level 8. So that is the only addition. The rest were already in the standard. And I think I've sufficiently covered the major changes. Now, the rest of the changes in the standard were basically to bring the standard in alignment with COPA 2017, the new COPA, right? The old standard was written for the old COPA, which had 9 areas. So the new COPA actually addresses 7 areas. So it has been aligned to the new COPA. So I'm not going through the process standards that have changed. So that is one of the purpose of this revision, is to bring it in alignment with the COPA Baru, and of course MQF 2.0, which affects area 1, which is in terms of the learning outcomes. So that has already been addressed. And the others are addressing problems that we have already faced, issues that has come about in the last couple of years because of lack of clarity and certain practices that did not really contribute to enhancing the postgraduate education. So that has been improved and set, and that's where we are. Okay, Zamrin. Back to you, Zamrin.
Okay, terima kasih Prof. Azman atas.
I'll stop share.
Okay, terima kasih Prof. Azman atas pembintangan yang berikan sebentar tadi. Saya kira banyak kiranya berkongsi maklumat tentang status terkini lah tentang sarjana dan kedoktoran bagi version 2021. Saya rasa untuk sesi seterusnya yang ditunggu-tunggu, saya kira sesi Q&A. So kita dah dapat banyak soalan actually sebenarnya daripada Beijing Hall, dan dalam masa sama juga kita ada juga peserta-peserta yang telah indicate raise hand. Kita akan bagi peluang juga untuk peserta yang bagi untuk raise hand untuk bertanya soalan secara direct. Okey, saya rasa untuk permulaan kita pergi kepada Beijing Hall. Kita untuk sekretariat kita pilih soalan. Okey. 3.1 page 14, minimum language proficiency of the candidate must be determined. Can we put language proficiency as a graduation requirement instead of entry? Prof?
Okay, entry requirement is to ensure the student can actually follow and perform in the program. Entry requirement is not an outcome requirement. So outcome requirement you need to write in your PLO. Okay, if you want a student to be to attain a certain level of proficiency, you have to write it in the PLO or related to the PLO. So students at the end of the program will be able to have this command of the language, or MOET 3 or MOET 4, MOET 5. So in the standard we are talking about, to clearly indicate what level of proficiency they need to have for them to be able to start as a master student or PhD student, because the whole program is going to be delivered in a language. The student need to write, speak, read, think in a language. So this is more of a requirement to enter rather than requirement to outcome. But you are free to also add outcome requirements, right? In addition to entry requirements, you want to say at the end of the program, the students should have one level higher, right? That's go ahead. I think it's up to the HEP to have it also as a outcome requirement. But in the standard, we are talking about as an entry requirement. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Prof. Okay, next questions, Secretary. Okay, if a master student convert to PhD and the supervisor has no prior master student, is it acceptable?
I'm not sure what the question is. If a master student converts to PhD and the supervisor has no prior master student. No, master students can, in current standard, can convert to a PhD, right? The conversion can take place. So I'm not sure what is the role of the supervisor here.
Saya problem ini berkaitan dengan syarat menjadi supervisor tu. So dia punya student tak complete master lah kot. So dia convert to PhD.
So it will count as a PhD student now because dia akan convert kan jadi PhD student. So can the question is, can the supervisor continue to jadi supervisor? Oh, okay, that is the question.
Yes. Itu soalan dia.
I mean, in the standard, we said that he has actually supervised. If you look at the standard for supervisor for PhD itu, dia termasuk masters and doctorate, bukan doctorate saja. If you look at the standard clearly, so you shouldn't have any problem actually continuing. Dia pernah buat masters. I remember that was the final revision that Majlis required. Right, for PhD, supervisor itu has done has supervised the masters or PhD candidate. Betul Zamrin, I'm referring to the document itself. So this supervisor shouldn't have any problem continuing with this particular case. But there's not enough information. I fully understand what's the issue here. Okay, I can come back to this.
Okay, next. Okay, for appointment of principal supervisor, he must have supervised masters or doctorate candidates to completion. Can this requirement be waived for FRJS recipients who is supervising doctoral student?
If you are already supervising doctoral student, okay, I can understand the first part is what the standard says, and second part is your issue. No, this matter was raised, and Majlis didn't think that exemption should be given. Okay. So memang dulu kita ada cadangan tapi dia tak terima. No, it won't be waived simply because you already got a grant. Okay, so that's a straight answer.
Right. Next.
Okay, what do we mean by rigorous internal assessment? Okay, it means you have a systematic process to assess. Systematic here, it's documented. You know what are you looking for? How are you going to do this? For example, you could have actually an interview where you already established what you are going to look for in an interview, and this is basically like a mini viva. You're asking the students about the field, right? Could be an interview, could be a performance test, could be a written test. So rigorous assessment here means is actually a systematic assessment with clear criteria in terms of what are you looking for, what are you assessing, and also the method you're using to do this. So it's not just looking at, for example, 2 years, 3 years. That is itself doesn't represent rigorous assessment, right? So rigorous assessment require you to examine the candidate. It could be orally, it could be in writing, it could be actually for them to perform certain things to demonstrate depth of understanding or knowledge in a particular area. As appropriate to the discipline and as is practical to the HEP under the circumstances. So so in these cases, you're looking at most of this, we are looking at in addition to the qualification, what experience they have, what knowledge they have, right? So it's almost like what APLA does with people who don't have qualification. They're looking at systematically looking at what is the experience, what's the nature of the experience, what is the depth of the experience, what is the variety of experience they have. So as long as your process has that, and then at the end you have a decision. So when we say rigorous internal assessment, it is systematic, it is documented. What you are doing and what criteria is used to assess, and then of course following that is the outcome. So if you have that, that will take the boxes in terms of a rigorous internal assessment.
Okay, Kipra, the next questions.
Sure.
What is acceptable ratio of candidates to supervisors according to MQA? Some of the program standards put them at 15 per person, but the ratio is dependent on many things. That's why we say the HEP need to set this ratio based on program standards or good practices, and also its own workload, total workload of the staff. Different institutions, the workload may be different, right? So one ratio may be appropriate to one institution. That ratio may not actually work given the way in which you assign work to the lecturer. It is also dependent on how much, what kind of systems is there to support the supervisor, right? There may be a lot of other services around to support the supervisor in terms of students' writing skills, researching skills, method skills, software related skills, things like that. There may be a lot. So some institutions provide a lot of these services. So the supervisor may have less burden because some of this burden is taken by the postgraduate center to cover all the students. So they provide. So it also depends on what is the totality of services provided institution to the student, and what services the lecturer itself, the supervisor himself need to provide. Okay, certainly certain things the supervisor will provide, but they also provide additional services to the student depending on the student itself, candidate. So there's no one right ratio, but there is always a point at which it becomes optimal, after which the quality of supervision deteriorates, right? And most of the time we learn this by practice. At some point in time, you can see the number of complaints coming in. They don't have enough adequate supervisors' time. Supervisors are not really carefully reading the chapters and giving feedback within a reasonable time. The turnaround time should be reasonable. And worst case scenario, the student almost completes the program as the project or research, and then at that point you find there are major flaws. So it looks like somebody didn't really pay attention to what the student was doing along the way, right? That is the optimal point may actually be different for a lot of different institutions, and also depends on the kind of students you're taking in, related degrees or not. They're coming with research background or not, from a non-research background to a research program. If you have this kind of students coming in, the profile of students coming in, you have you need to think in terms of a good ratio for this, because the profile of students also depends on the burden that is going to be assumed by the supervisor. How much of coaching guidance you need to provide, because the students come with very little research background. Many DBA students coming from MBA have very little research background. They have very little formal research training, and also writing training for research. So when they come in and you have a lot of these kind of students, you're not looking at a ratio of 20. It may be even 10 or less, because there's a lot more emphasis. So I would love to give you a ratio. Zamri and MQ the ratio. So I think it is something, a range may be more suitable, I mean 10 to 15, but even that range needs to come with so many caveats, considerations to look at. And some of these you get it through experience. You carry out the supervision and then you watch over and then see how well it's progressing, and then you can tweak the numbers. So it is, in short, observe and start maybe with a smaller ratio and then move to a larger once you see that supervisor is able to cope. I think that way you keep everybody's interest intact. If you start large and then have a problem and then you start waiting, then you already have experience in problem. So there's a negative way of adjusting and there's a positive way of adjusting. I would recommend that you use a positive way of adjusting the ratio. Start small and then they can cope well, and then you start increasing. And then at some point in time, you realize that there's an optimum in your institution for your lecturers, for the type of students that are coming to you. Okay.
Okay, thanks Prof. Okay, sebelum continue baca soalan di beginning hall, saya nak bagi peluang kepada peserta yang angkat tangan untuk bertanya soalan. Boleh Prof?
Boleh, no problem.
Okay, kepada siapa tadi? Dr. Azhar. Dr. Azhar ada di situ kan?
Yes.
Boleh
yes,
unmute yourself, Dr. Azhar?
Ya.
Yes, Dr.
Okay,
Azhar.
silakan Dr. Azhar.
Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much for the info. Saya ada satu soalan berkenaan dengan standard, di mana standard audit design telah menetapkan bilangan supervision iaitu 1:7 dalam supervision lah. Yang mana kita melihat keperluan itu melebihi daripada keperluan yang ditetapkan dalam standard masters yang dinyatakan tadilah. Bagaimana pandangan Prof?
Thank you, Dr. Azhar. Dalam standard MDD, correct me if I'm wrong, to the best of my memory, kita tak letakkan ratio. Kita perlukan HEP tetapkan ratio, berpandukan kepada program standard, amalan baik dan juga beban kerja di institusi tersebut. So we asked them to set. We didn't set the ratio because it's difficult for a standard without addressing discipline to set a standard. So this is more appropriate be set at the program standard lah, because you're not dealing at the discipline level, and you know what's the nature of supervision within the discipline, right? Nature of it could be common, it could be something very unique to that discipline, and that might impact these ratios, right? So, like I said, it's difficult to set one ratio. Maybe it is more practical to actually set a range, and within the range they can actually set based on many other considerations as well. So if let me know if in the standard we have actually set it, because we were very clear in our discussion. We said no, in the MDD tak boleh set the ratio, but the MDD requires the HEP to set the ratio, and then we can assess and see whether they are operating according to the ratio, and then they are also learning how the ratio actually is working in terms of quality of supervision to students, and then they're adjusting. So that's a process of assessment.
Okay, Prof. Thanks. Okay. Kita continue, ada seorang lagi peserta yang angkat tangan.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, please unmute yourself. Miss Yin. Kalau tak ada, kita skip pergi ke peserta berikutnya. Siapa ni? Aru Kiara JP. Adakah orangnya? Kalau tak ada, kita pergi kepada wakil daripada Mediu, Cik Azamin. Cik Azamin.
Assalamualaikum.
Silakan Cik Azamin.
Saya nak bertanya dua perkara. Yang pertama sekali yang ratio between supervisors and supervisees. Is it possible for us to not set the ratio, but instead, because the gist of the requirement is to ensure that the supervisor has adequate time or suitable workload to supervise the students. So instead of specifying the ratio, is it possible for us to kind of quantify or unitize the number of supervisee to complement the 18 to 20 maximum teaching hours? So instead of putting as a ratio, we put it as we quantify into maximum workload instead. That's one thing. And the other one, okay, for the entry requirement with regard to language proficiency, not fulfilling the language requirement, students can still be accepted under conditional offer. That's according to Mohis circular. So for students from other disciplines having to go through prerequisite courses, do we need to accept them under conditional offer, because this will affect many other things like perhaps funding or duration of study and many things. So first one between ratio and workload, and the second one conditional offer for prerequisite. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the first one, which is the ratio. Ratio is a common way to indicate the quality of supervision that should be available to the student. So hours is actually highly variable, because the measure of hours in universities vary. Between universities vary. How they calculate their workload in hours vary a lot, right? So to use something that is highly variable will be quite problematic. That's why the ratio is used. And also ratio is quite relatable if you want to compare with even other countries' practices and other standards. So it's a common metric used. That's why we are using it, and not using so much hours. I understand what you're talking about is if you could put it in a way that really integrates into the workload assessment. It'll be more easier to interpret within institutions. But in the standard, it's difficult to really put that in terms of hours because it may require more hours, less hours, depending on profile of students. Are you getting experienced students, accomplished students, excellent students, or getting different type of students with lacking experience, things like that? It may require a lot more hours. So that's the reason for why we are saying that you need to fix the ratio, right? And also program standards have the ratios, and you can also compare it across jurisdiction, even in UK and things like that. It's more in terms of ratio, looking in terms of ratio rather than looking actually in terms of the specific hours in the institution. That's one. The second one, I think you raised about prerequisite. Yeah, prerequisite means they will have conditional admission, and they need to do these courses unrelated. This is where they have an unrelated qualification and they don't have the relevant experience in lieu. Then they need to do the requisites, and it has to be something they do before they enroll or they start the program. So the admission memang conditional, then they need to do this before they start the program. How quickly can they start the program depending on how the provision of prerequisite is structured. It could be on a modular intensive basis. It could be stretched over a semester. It could be a month-long thing. It can be online. So it's up to the institutions to see how quickly they can allow the students to access and complete their prerequisite requirements. So it's intended to be something, it is to be done before they enroll. They enroll in the program with these conditions. So they need to meet the conditions so that they can actually start the master's or doctoral work. That is the one of the things mentioned. The other one that you mentioned is the language, is it? The other one was the language requirement. In this standard, we stated that the HEP need to set the minimum language proficiency, right, as an entry requirement. This was asked previously also by a written question. Can the entry requirement become extra requirement? An entry requirement is at the entry level. So this is for the student to follow the program. So if he doesn't have sufficient proficiency in a language, how is he going to start reading and researching and writing? So so the language proficiency may vary according to disciplines. I agree, different disciplines. But there is a minimum language requirement necessary for them to actually perform in the program, right? So it is treated as an entry requirement for now, for you to set.
Prof,
yeah.
Saya rasa soalan kedua tadi adalah berkaitan tentang conditional offer, since kita ada bridging atau prerequisite.
Yeah.
Adakah PPT kena keluarkan offer letter tu as conditional offer?
Dia conditional offer. Kalau dia tak ada experience lah, dia conditional offer lah. Dia memang pengambilan bersyarat lah.
So dia kena fulfill bridging dulu lah. Okay,
Right.
Okay, thanks. Kita hold dulu soalan-soalan secara terus ni. Kita go back to the pigeonhole untuk soalan berikut dia. Sekretariat. Okay. Bolehkah khusus research metodologi dilaksanakan dalam satu kelas? Bersama dengan pelajaran dalam kejuruteraan sains, bisnes, etc. ataupun mesti diajar bersyarat dalam bidang?
Kursus metodologi dilaksanakan satu kelas bersama. The students be combined? That is one question. Or can the dialog pensyarah dalam bidang? Can you combine? I think in principle you can combine, but in practice you want to also make sure the clustering of students is within broadly similar disciplines lah. Kalau you combine engineering dengan art and design, dia disiplin yang metodologi dia jauh banyak berbeza. So it's going to be very difficult for the lecturer actually to deliver the whether it's for engineering or whether it's for art and science, to deliver in a way that actually provides the students with research knowledge. So so if you combine it, maybe students in cognate disciplines lah, related disciplines, dia business students, mass comm students, political science students are the same class, because dia cognate discipline, dia punya methodology approaches tu ada banyak kesamaan. If you are bringing in a science or engineering student, then you might find there's quite a lot of methodological issues, and one lecturer may not be able to address all, right? So combine itu boleh, right? Tapi yang penting ialah the students in the group, the disciplines that are grouping together, get adequate exposure and training in the methodology that is relevant to their area. That is the ultimate test lah. Purpose of this is actually to make sure they are properly instructed, they gather the knowledge so they can actually use it in the research project that they are carrying out. That is the important test. Lecturer pun macam tu juga. Kalau dalam, if an engineering lecturer is going to teach social science students, dia boleh mengajar phenomenology tak? Qualitative research tak? Engineering lecturers are not trained in that. Dia pakai scientific method kan? So may not be able to provide. So end of the day, the students in music or art and design may not leave the program with adequate knowledge. There may be, so if it is within cognate disciplines, maybe one lecturer and then grouping may work. But if it is too broad, it won't serve the purpose. Ultimately, if it doesn't serve the purpose, it's not effective. So hanya memenuhi keperluan sajalah, tapi tak berkesan. So I think you will need to keep an eye on the reason for and the purpose of this course in how you're structuring and how you're clustering, gathering students and who is teaching. So that question you also need to ask yourself. Is it effective or not? The students leave this program adequately instructed and have knowledge that's necessary for them to carry out their research in the field. So if you can answer that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, ada soalan tambahan tu bawah tu, course be taught together for different level for master and PhD.
Can you combine the research knowledge is probably common. Okay, the expectation in terms of the research may be different, as long as you can sufficiently address the different expectations in terms of master student and PhD student in a joint class. Why not? Because the core knowledge you're teaching is still the same, but other expectation in terms of the rigor of research that you do in PhD and in masters, as long as the students are adequately addressed. So it's not, again, going back to this principle, it's not a question of can you combine or classing. Yang penting itu research students or doctoral students have got are adequately informed and have knowledge on the research, the methodology and all other requirements that is appropriate to that level of research. And the master students have. So as long as they come out of this with the knowledge, then buat sekali ke ataupun asing-asing ke terpulanglah kepada you.
Okay, Prof. Next questions. Nida. Okay. Okay.
Itu untuk Zamrin.
Kelonggaran until we get an FA to have a main supervisor who has not graduated a master or PhD student but has a lot of research experience and consultancy project. Macam mana nak bagi keluarga ni? Tapi yang ini kita bagi transisi sampai Mac 2022. So sekiranya kalau masih lagi tak complete sehingga Mac, so saya rasa kita boleh juga tengok case by case lah. So minta PPT menulis kepada MK untuk mendapatkan pengecualian lah untuk standard ni. Okay, right. The next question. Okay, salam sejahtera. Bolehkah graduat sarjana muda sains masuk program sarjana kejuruteraan tanpa bridging program? Macam mana, Prof? Pandangan ini yang related
those in engineering need to decide whether it is a related degree, right? I don't think it's fair for you to ask me, right? But if those who are managing the engineering program, do they consider this as a related degree? So related degree, then there is a body of knowledge that the student get in the program that is adequate and appropriate also for engineering. Then maybe I can only answer in that at that level. Some other science tu boleh masuk tak masuk di sarjana muda sains. I understand this sebagai dalam bidang natural sciences lah. Science ni macam-macam ada, social science pun science juga. Whether they can go in or not, it is something that the engineering discipline need to decide. What are the related qualifications, right? I'm in no position actually to tell this is related or not related. Orang dalam bidang kejuruteraan boleh putuskan lah.
Okay, next question. Thanks, Prof. Okay. Can we use NEC broad field or narrow field to determine the related field for the entry requirement?
That could be one basis lah, because it's grouped under the same heading. But if you look carefully at the NEC code, they may be in this broadly the same heading, tapi dia punya NEC code ni kadang-kadang dia punya coverage tu ada yang luas, ada yang sempit. So I say it can be one of the consideration.
Okay, next question. Ada lagi? Okay, ini berkenaan structure supervisor training, Prof. Can the training be done by internal trainer or should be done by external? If external, what is the
since the standard doesn't say anything about the organizing, so you have full freedom to decide whether you want to do it internally, whether you want to do it externally is up to you. The point is have a structured supervisor training program.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Next. Do principal supervisor or PhD by research candidates need to have graduated postgraduate student or the supervisor ongoing postgraduate supervisor experience is acceptable?
Dalam standard dia kata to completion, right?
To completion kan?
Completion. So in the standard, completion means standard lah dah endorse. Okay, that is the understanding of completion. So standard has actually endorsed the candidate. So the requirement there is clear lah. Kalau ongoing belum complete lagi.
Alright. Okay, thanks, Prof. Next question. Bachelor degree candidates who are registered for MSc may apply to convert to PhD within 1 year for full time or 2 years for part-time? Is there any leeway for universities to decide on a longer duration?
No, the reason for this duration is master's itself is 1 year. So if it's a full-time program, so the master's could be 1 year. So you can't really extend the period to any longer than that, because you need to complete the master's. So if you want to convert, it has to be done within a shorter period of time. You got to decide whether this candidate actually is good enough. That's why it's not an open duration, right? But both full-time and part-time, there's a fixed duration to do it within. So under the standard, it's actually quite clear. It's actually within the duration, which means HEP cannot have a longer duration. It has to be within this duration. The only thing we have done is in this standard, unlike the earlier standard, we have actually included part-time as well, so that it's fair. It treats both full-time and part-time student fairly in terms of duration. They have the same pathway, but that's the duration. So I don't think under the standard you can actually, the university can actually prolong this duration.
Okay.
Okay.
Alright, thanks Prof. Okay, next. Ada lagi? Kita boleh ambil satu lagi soalan kot. Sebelum satu lagi soalan. So second. Can Viva be exempted, approved by academic board, and or Senate for alternating circumstances?
I'm not sure what you mean by extenuating circumstances, because Viva can be conducted in person, online, virtually. So extenuating circumstances means what? I'm not sure. So unless you tell what are some examples or anything, then we can tell you. But it's a requirement in the standard, so it cannot be. When I say Viva is oral Viva, we're talking about Viva OC, not exempted, is a requirement. So they need to go through this. And you need to tell what is extenuating some circumstances. I can't imagine one and then say whether that might happen or not happen.
Okay.
Okay.
Prof, boleh terima satu lagi soalan ke macam mana?
Boleh. Saya tak ada masalah.
Okay,
Saya
kalau
tak ada
Prof
masalah.
continue, kita pergi.
Boleh nak jawab semua soalan, boleh, tak ada masalah.
Tapi saya tengok ada soalan yang redundant lah, yang itu kita akan tak jawab nanti lah. Okay, so Farhana. Bridging courses tu. Saya itu. Okay, yang ni Prof berkenaan bridging courses.
To confirm, bridging courses must carry out letter grade with full assessment not offered. Yes, bridging courses require assessment for you to ensure that the student has sufficient knowledge. If it's just an audit course, he just goes through, and whether he has sufficient knowledge or not, cannot be determined, right? So an assessment is necessary. Whatever grade, things like that, it's up to HEP lah, letter grade ke, marks ke, points ke, so it's HEP issue.
Okay, thanks Prof. Next. Okay, yang ikut. Okay. Whatever was is not compulsory for Monash doctoral program. However, there are 1 hour pre-submission seminar and annual oral defense. Is this acceptable?
I understand the Australian practice, so I think those Australian universities can actually communicate with the MQA, because they operate under two quality regimes, right here and also in Australia. So the panel did discuss this, and then so this one they need to be given different treatment. But I think the fact that you are talking about something that is equivalent, then I think they can write in address to MQA for this treatment.
Next. Can a person become a main or principal supervisor after 31st March 2022 if he or she has successfully graduated PhD student in the past as co-supervisor?
Can a person who become main supervisor?
Successfully graduated.
Yeah, I mean you have co-supervisor, so you already tick one box, right, for main supervisor. That goes not just during the interim period. I mean, even what if you have done it in the past, then that still counts as far as
Yes.
having co-supervised students in the past. Right. So I think it's more or less self-explanatory, the question.
Okay. Okay. Next. Okay. Next. If the supervisor first master student convert to PhD, the supervisor would not have supervised any master's candidate to completion. Could he or she still be the principal supervisor for the PhD?
The supervisors first master student conversion. Certainly you can continue as supervisor. Whether principal supervisor or not is the question, no? Right? That's the question. And at this point, he has not met the requirement to be a principal supervisor because he doesn't have, if not actually graduated a master's or PhD student. So based on the standard, then he can continue as a co-supervisor, but not as a main supervisor. So
Okay.
not a main supervisor.
Okay, noted. Thanks, Prof. Next. Does the HP need to notify if international students spend some time in their home country to carry out the research?
Amrin? Ini.
Ya ini tadi isu lah kan, kat mana dia nak?
Yeah, no, it's not an issue.
Kan isu pun, kat mana tempat dia?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, next. Is it compulsory for all international students to take the Malay language offered by HP during their candidature period? Is there a circular on this requirement? Or this requirement?
The international students. I am not aware of.
Saya pun sama juga is not aware
of a requirement, but it could be HEP could require international students to go through. Could be an HEP requirement.
But certainly not from MQA lah.
No, not from MQA.
Okay. All right. Next. Okay, qualification as principal supervisor, be as supervised master or doctoral research candidate to completion. Level 2, page 18, as main supervisor only or co-supervisor can be considered too. Equal to page 18.
Okay, the requirement for principal supervisor is that you have supervised someone to completion. So it has to be read as a co-supervisor, you have already done this, right? So that the requirement is as a co-supervisor, you have actually supervised someone to completion, master's or PhD.
Okay. Okay. Next. If master student convert to PhD but the supervisor is without doctoral degree, can the supervisor continue to supervise the student if have co-supervisor with doctoral degree?
Under the standard, you can be a co-supervisor or even a principal supervisor at doctoral level, provided you have extensive research experience. So that if you fall under that category, memang boleh lah. Extensive research experience.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Prof. Next. Ada lagi? Dah jawab tadi. Okay, ini Prof yang related field tadi.
Where there is a program standard doing this, determining what are the related standards. Related fields lah. So program standards provide. If there is no program standard, then it's left to institutions to look at what is a related field. And you have to be exercise a conservative approach by looking at what is a related, not related field. Even if it's left to standard, it's not an arbitrary exercise. It's an exercise based on knowledge that these fields are related. And related, we mean cognate fields are related fields, dekat.
Will the bridging courses calculated for the graduating credit hours and CGPA?
Not in the program. So if it is a program with coursework, things like that, because this is a prerequisite courses, so they are not actually used as fulfillment of the outcome of the program per se, right? This is to fulfill the admission requirement. Right? So tak boleh lah ambil masuk dalam program. No.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Okay, next. Can student with executive master program qualification not accredited by MQA can join the PhD program at a public university?
What's the dasar?
So yang ini tak dapat. So actually untuk laikan masuk ni kita kena pastikan setiap untuk MQA punya kena accredited by MQA lah. So
it's an accredited program lah.
Yeah, it's accredited program. Okay, kalau not accredited, so tak boleh masuk. Okay. Okay, next. PhD IT, any MQA publication requirements like any journal papers, corpus, journal papers, corpus, conference papers, etc. Program standard has not defined the level of publications. Okay, Prof.
To the best of my knowledge, unless maybe this is referring to publication requirements for doctoral degree. I assume that this is what the question is about. Under MDD baru, we didn't put this as a requirement. It is for HEP to set this requirement. If they want publication, and also what type of publication in what type of or what level of journals it's so Q1 ke Q2 ke conference ke scopus ke the HEP need to set for their students as part of the graduating requirement, right? So I'm not sure whether program standards have actually gone into this. But certainly the MDD baru new one does not set this as a global requirement that masters and PhD you need to have publication to graduate. So this falls largely at to HEP.
Yes. Okay, next. Soalan seterusnya.
Okay, so the question is whether project paper tak boleh. Dia for research-based program memang master's or doctorate degree you're referring to is actually by research.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Next question. NHP point in exam supervisor expense supervisor. If HP does not have any internet exposure with some expertise.
Okay, the MDD baru still has the same requirement as the old MDD. The main supervisor has to be the full-time or MP, but you can still retain the previous supervisor as a co-supervisor in the to the student. Right, the co-supervisor can come from outside.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Next, Rana. Let's say for top courses and mode, does prospectus mean that the students are allowed to make an extensive review instead of project work? Or
okay, in the new MDD, when you use the word conspectus, we use it to refer to research work carried out in certain disciplines, like in arts, where they have a thesis together with artifacts. They're part of, they're seen as together as part of the submission, right? It's not just the thesis, the written documentation, but it has got artifacts. So it could be sculpture, could be artwork, could be performance, exhibition, and things like that. So this is used in the context of those disciplines where this, so the disciplines where you don't have this, it is thesis or dissertation or project, then this actually doesn't really apply. So could an extensive review instead of a project work? It depends on in the taught courses, what is the nature of the project that they need to do. So it will depend on what is the nature of the project defined in this particular course. So it could be an empirical work. It could be literature review. It could be a conceptual or theoretical work. It could be a product, right? It depends on what is the project in your program, because taught courses and especially taught courses like the project in a mixed mode, it's still very much a dissertation, because at least 50% of the research is based on this. So whether it's a conspectus or not depends on the word conspectus is used specifically for discipline. So certain disciplines, this may not relevant at all. So they do a thesis and that's it. But this is meant for certain disciplines, especially in arts and humanities, where they have this. So we want to make sure we also address this. Otherwise, you're talking always about thesis. So taught courses and mixed mode, if you are in the discipline where conspectus is relevant, it is an extensive review. Not only review, it is actually integrates with the work, the other artifact that you produce. So this is a written work that reflects that that has got all the theory behind it, the concept behind it, the thinking behind it, the contribution of this to the discipline, things like that is actually all reflected in this document. That actually incorporates and relates to all the artifacts that you produce as part of this work, right? Then, so it's not just on its own an extensive review, but it is actually writing that functions like a thesis, but it recognizes that there are artifacts that go along with this thesis work. So there is a combination of work that together forms the submission. So the submission may be in two or three parts. Often submission is just one document, right? In typical research context is one, but in certain disciplines it is several components that make up the submission. And the written part is one important component of submission, but there are other artifacts. So it depends on, when you say taught courses, mixed mode, what discipline, right?
Okay, thanks, Prof. Next. Ada lagi tak, Rana?
Yes, you can, because he has gone through a course, so you recognize that he has completed these courses.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Next, Rana. What is the evidence needed to be provided for past Ovation experience to completion if the lecture hire is from another institution and do not have the letter of appointment with him?
Oh, sometimes it is in the thesis itself. The student reports that typically students will acknowledge their supervisors, right? So you don't have a letter of appointment, you can look at the thesis document itself. So so there can be other, if you don't have this letter itself, there can be other forms of evidence. So one I can immediately comes to mind is actually the thesis itself.
Yes.
So the thesis itself, the documentation can sign by supervisor to okay by supervisor, things like that. So there are other documents that supervisor signs to say completed. So those can also. So worst case scenario is actually the acknowledgement by the student of the supervisor.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Okay, next, Rana, kalau di.
This one, there is a guideline issued through MQA already, right?
Yes.
On possibility of exemption. Dia ada banyak syarat lah, right? So I will refer you to that guideline. Memang boleh, but you may need to look at the guideline in terms of what would enable you to do this, right? And remember exemption. If you want to talk about exemption or credit transfer, the institution needs that you have followed the course, and also you are looking at the course, the content, and also achievement, right? So if you have just followed a course, but there's no attainment, there's no, that's going to make it difficult. So that's why, even though the requirement is for you to provide and follow a course, if there is assessment, the HEPS assessment of a research method, that can actually support the students' application for exemption later on, because they are the, he has done the course, this is the content, and this is the attainment. So in this case, but please look at the guideline issued by MQA. Memang boleh, tapi ada conditions lah.
Saya rasa untuk soalan setakat ini saja. So saya tengok kebanyakan soalan banyak yang repetition. So untuk soalan yang tidak berjawab, kami akan jawab dan kita akan paparkan dalam portal nanti lah untuk semua, untuk makluman semua pihak stakeholder lah. Saya rasa itu saja, Prof. Ada tambahan apa, Prof?
No, just the final words from me is okay, if there are transition issues, then I think contact MQA lah.
Yes.
Kalau I suppose transition is to allow this HEP time to bring themselves into alignment and things like that. So transition. If there's any doubt, please forward the question to MQA, so that we can give you some guidance if we can at this point in time. So kalau ada apa-apa soalan, keep posing this question to MQA, and then you will get, because the questions also help us to think practically lah, Syarat tu dah letak practically, so the guidance often is in how to do this practically. And then we can actually take this and populate an FAQ, so that kemudian orang ada soalan, they can actually refer to the answer given, kita tak payah buat secara runcit. So keep the questions coming, and I think that is helpful to everyone, to us, to MQA, and also to other HEP yang mungkin akan hadapi soalan yang sama kemudian hari, so they can actually go to the FAQ.
Okay. Thanks Prof. Okay, sedikit update dari saya sebelum kita akhir sesi kali ini. Sebelum saya mengundur diri, saya mengambil kesempatan ini untuk sekali lagi untuk mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada pihak panel kajian semula, serta tidak lupa kepada semua pihak berkepentingan yang sama-sama menyumbang dalam kajian semula sendiri ini. Diharap kerjasama dan sokongan semua bekal berterusan. Untuk makluman semua, MQA juga bagi tujuan kesinambungan standard master and doctoral PhD ni, kita akan bangunkan sendiri untuk borang MQA 01 dan 02, master by research dan PhD lah, dalam proses pembangunan, sehingga dibangunkan, maknanya pihak PPT boleh pakai borang Kopa sedadilah MQA 01, 02 dan contextualize dalam standard master and PhD ni. Okay. Untuk makluman juga, MQA akan mengadakan webinar Kopa ODL pada 7 Mei 2021. So maklumat lanjut sila ikuti Facebook MQA ataupun laman web MQA dari masa ke semasa. Saya kata itu saja. Sekian, terima kasih daripada pihak MQA. Terima kasih semua. Terima kasih Prof. Terima kasih semua.
Okay, sama-sama.